Please note, today's session is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the National Cancer Institute, I wish to welcome everyone to today's Implementation Science webinar. We're excited to be joined by our speakers. Before we get started, a brief word about logistics. All lines are in listen-only mode. We ask that if you're not already on mute, to please keep your phone on mute for the duration of today's presentation. As mentioned, the session is being recorded and muting all lines will help us to avoid any background noise. We are encouraging all questions and comments. Questions can be submitted using the Q&A feature on the right-hand side of your screen. Type your question to the provided Q&A field and hit submit. Feel free to submit your questions at any time during today's call. We'll be using the chat panel to share resources throughout today's talk. Note that you may need to activate the appropriate panel using the menu options found at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, we recommend navigating to the View menu at the top of your screen and selecting Hide Non-Video Participants, as this will give you the best glimpse of our great speakers. And with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Okay, well, thank you, Sarah, and thanks everyone for joining us. If you missed the title, this is our opportunity to really reflect on 15 years of a conference that is coming up next month, the Science of Dissemination and Implementation that we've been doing in various forms since 2007. And with us on that reflection, that journey of reflection, are three wonderful people whose smiling faces you can see in front of you: Renad, Ronnie, and Brian. All of whom have really played such tremendous roles through their careers in helping us to advance the science. And we thought it would just be wonderful to have a fun conversation with the four or five of us and all of you, really around where the field has been, where we might where we need to go next, project the field to look like in the future. We've got a couple of polls to really get your thoughts as well along the way. So look forward to hearing your contributions. And as always, shape the conversation around the key questions that you have, the key insights that you're curious to hear from our wonderful experts who are with us. Just to say things I was right before we got on, that we're in the 15th year of this conference, and just as it happened, it wasn't actually planned this way, but there's sort of a 5-year increment with which I had the fortune of getting introduced to each of our wonderful guests. So go back 20 years, 2002. And Brian Mittman was then the head of the Quality Enhancement Research Initiative at the VA Query. And that was where I, as relatively new to NIH and the National Institute of Mental Health, had the great fortune of learning all of the wonderful foundational work for the VA and for the field at large as to how we do a better job of dissemination and implementation and really building that knowledge base. Go 5 years from that, 2007. And I had the great fortune of being connected to Renad Baitis, who then was a grad student who was focusing on this transition from clinical trials into implementation science and thinking about cognitive behavioral therapy and how we get that taken up. Go 5 years next, and we had this wonderful thing that all of us took part in, the Implementation Research Institute, where in 2012, I think Ronnie and Renad were both fellows of the IRI, and Brian and I had an opportunity to serve as faculty. So altogether, there's, I guess, 45, me being able to know. But clearly, I've respected and appreciated their incredible work for that time. So thank you. And I want to, again, go back a little bit, go back to 2007, and just hear from each of you. If you try and here's this lovely fire to do so, warm yourself by the fire. How would each of you describe, if you could, implementation science, and at least your exposure to implementation science at that point? Maybe I know of sort of I met each of you. So if we can start with Brian and then Renad and then Ronnie. So your reflections on implementation science 15 years back.
Thanks, and my thanks to David, Sarah, for the opportunity to join and look back, and to my two co-panelists. So for me, that 2007 was actually 15 years into my own involvement in the field. So even at that time, I was perhaps an old timer. Because 1992 was the first article that I published talking about what we then called changing physician behavior. It then morphed over time into quality improvement research. A few of us didn't like that term. In the VA, they began talking about translational research. I was one of the early folks who helped to push forward the Don't Use the T Word campaign to avoid confusing type 2 translation and type 1 translation. And so implementation research, of course, was what the VA began to use. And as you said, 2007 was 5 years after my beginning of my opportunity to direct the query program and help establish the program for the implementation research coordinators, the query series, and the journal Implementation Science. We started the planning process for the journal in about 2003, 2004. Again, for me, the field was well established, although it went through some changes in name and obviously changes in focus, and most dramatically, of course, changes in size and scope and in prominence and impact. And the process, of course, continues in an upward trajectory. But again, 2007 for many of us in the VA and elsewhere was well along the path rather than just the beginning of a journey.
Great. So Renat.
Yeah, well, tough act to follow, Brian Mittman, one of the OGs of implementation science, but I'll do my best. So 2007 for me was actually the beginning of my journey. I was a second-year graduate student in clinical psychology at Temple, and I had observed clinically and read a lot about this thing called a research to practice gap. And then I realized that there was actually a science to study questions about how to help people do the thing. So I hopped on a train to DC. I don't know how I found out about the conference, but I said to my mentor, Phil Kendall at the time, would you pay for me to go to DC to this conference at NIH? And he was like, sure, go ahead, go find out what's happening. And I was at that first conference. I think there were only about 80 or 100 people there. Is that right, David? Is that about the number we had that first year?
I think maybe more, but not orders of magnitude more. Yeah.
It wasn't a huge room. And I think Ken Wells spoke that year and Enola maybe. And I had the great privilege to meet you, David, because you did the technical assistance workshop afterwards. And I had this F-31 that did not do well in review. And you were helping me and connecting me with people who were doing work in that space. And there was just a tremendous buzz in the air about the potential for what implementation science could offer. But I think we were all trying to figure out what exactly it was, but Brian knew what it was. I just needed some time to get there.
Awesome. And Ronnie.
And I am the one who in 2007 wasn't thinking about implementation science at all, not yet. So I just want to say to the audience, you certainly don't have to be someone who was right there at the beginning to be part of this. In 2007, I was a new health services researcher. I had moved in grad school from social psychology, which was very theoretical and very fun, which I loved, to health psychology. So social psychology to health psychology, because I was looking for something that was more applied. And even health psychology for me was not enough. So I moved into health services research to really think about how could we impact quality and access to care. And it was through my health services research that I became aware of implementation science. And I eventually met Brian because I became part of the query program. And Brian literally said to me, you need to go to this conference. And I said, okay, because that's what Brian thought I should do. And so that's where I started to realize that there was this entire field of implementation science, as Renat so clearly explained, that was asking the kinds of questions that I wanted to ask, but didn't know that there was a field doing that, and was such a great trajectory from health psychology to health services research to implementation science. And I kept moving further along that pipeline to sort of say, like, how can I have the most impact for the work that, I'm hoping to do? So I'm, not a 2007 attendee, but a 2011, I think, was my first conference.
Awesome. Well, thanks for kicking us off. And of course, to everybody out there, as questions come up to you, please do put them in and we'll incorporate them in. So we're going to lurch back and forth from different years. So, sort of sticking with this sort of 2007 idea to the extent that you could think, or even just reflections through the time that you've spent, grappling with the question about how do we provide the answers. How would each of you characterize the field's change since those early days when you were engaging in it? And maybe I can start with Renat and then go to Brian and then Ronnie.
Sure. So I was thinking about this question, and the best way I can describe it in 2007, first of all, my own thinking was really in the infancy of what I was actually trying to answer. But things in the field were kind of in an untamed phase. We didn't have CFR, we didn't have implementation outcomes, we didn't have the ERIC taxonomy. And I think part of the fun for me was imagining kind of the shape of the field and what it could offer. And I still love that creativity. I think in implementation science, we don't have a formula about what each project is going to look like and what we're going to measure. But now what's changed, I think, is we have more of a toolkit to draw from that really allows us to advance the science of the methods and to create generalizable knowledge. So that's my thought on that question.
Great, thanks. Brian.
Yeah, so I'll offer some complimentary points. I agree with everything Renat said, as usual. So obviously the size of the field has changed, the volume of activity, the number of journals, the number of conferences, the number of centers, the number of publications and other output grants, the number of training programs, so all of those sort of objective measures. But not quite as obvious is the amount of acceptance and legitimacy. Many of you weren't around at a point where if you talk to some of the NIH institutions centers, after 5 or 10 minutes of finally, getting them to understand what you meant by implementation science, their response was something along the lines of, "Oh, we're the NIH, we fund the basic science. Sometimes we fund the clinical research. Our funded grantees publish in the New England Journal or the Lancet, and physicians adopt and take up what they've done. And if they don't, well, we have management consultants to take care of that." So that sort of idea that this is not a science, that it's not a set of issues and phenomena that warrant scientific research. We're no longer in that situation. The number of positions within major medical schools and elsewhere in implementation science, those are all notable changes, as well as just general awareness of the knowledge. If I could say, though, what has not changed, that is the level of energy and creativity, the amount of warmth within the community. We're a much larger community, but I think most of us still feel that it's a small community where we know and respect each other and work with each other and support each other. And very rewarding and stimulating community of researchers and set of issues to be examining.
Great, thanks. And Ronnie.
And just to follow on that, I would say that what's really exciting is all of the methodological pieces that are happening in implementation science. So when I first started, people were, it's a natural place to start, thinking like, what are the challenges? What are the determinants of implementation? Thinking of it from more of a discovery piece to really just, the methods that we can use to get evidence-based practice into real, routine care. And we share with each other so much. Just yesterday, in a mentoring core that I co-lead, we had, people from around the country presenting on the types of methods that they are using in their own, their smart designs, their adaptive designs, and just how much we really share amongst each other and how much we can learn. And there's so many people, we could read their papers, and we do have our mentees read those papers, but to have, people like Shauna Smith and Danny Almaral come to our mentoring core and actually break down how they do these complex designs, these adaptive randomized controlled designs, it's just fantastic.
Great. Thanks all of you each of you for those reflections. So we're going to do something for everybody. The next question, I both want to get the reflections from our panelists and also from everybody else out there. And so throughout the course, at least from my perspective in implementation science, there's been the potential that we've tried as best as we can to avoid this idea of sort of in versus out. I'm doing it, you're not doing it. I'm not doing it, you must be doing it. And I don't quite understand that. But at the same time, I think we found a lot of reflections at times. There's overlap between what we think about in implementation science and what we think about in so many other fields that have really braided together to help us to contribute the knowledge. And so we've thought about the different way to word this question, and this may not be best, but here's what we sort of landed on for today. And that's asking each of our panelists and then asking each of you in this sort of Slido poll that we're going to get. When did you know you were engaging in implementation science? So just really curious, while each of you is typing in, we want to hear, hear from, and then Brian, and then Renad. When each of you knew, I'm engaging in implementation science, but really curious. And if the answer for everybody is, well, I'm not, that's fine. There's no wrong answers, but we're just really curious on when did it occur to you that the things that you were concentrating on might be part of what people are terming as implementation science. So why don't we start with our panelists, and then curious to see what everyone sees as a new fire is in front of us.
I'm sorry, David, did you ask me to go first? Okay, so I'll never forget having a conversation with the head of primary care at a hospital about a grant proposal that I was really, an idea that I had that I really wanted to get buy-in for. So, somehow maybe because I, did a lot of community engagement work before going into grad school, understood that philosophy of, don't come with a fully formed research idea to a stakeholder, but like go and just ask, what's worrying you? What are you concerned about? And then to start that conversation from there. So it's having this great conversation with the head of primary care, and then we started to talk about like what we could do to address the problem that people who screen positive for depression don't end up getting the treatment that they need. And we started to develop some proposal ideas. And basically at this point, after about an hour conversation, turns to me and he says, okay, when can we get started? And then I was like, oh, we have to like write the proposal and get it funded, and then actually do the study, and then take that evidence and implement it. But it just made me realize, that in implementation science, sometimes there's a reason for impatience. Like there's a real problem that people have, our stakeholders, and in this case, the head of primary care at this hospital had, that he was like, this is a problem that needs addressing now. Like, what are we going to do about this now? So I realized at that point, and I was not yet an implementation scientist, and I was like, well, how am I going to keep these people engaged? How am I going to keep them engaged as we go through the process of writing a proposal, submitting it, getting it funded? And so just started to build a relationship with them by, having, lunch and learns, and having just an opportunity for them to stay, learn about some research that we were doing, maybe not this project, that we had been talking about, but just really trying to keep those stakeholders engaged, build a community, get that trust, so that the next time there was another project that perhaps they wanted to do, they'd call me, we'd work, so I would really building the community with whom I needed to do research with from the beginning. And I think that was my first realization that I was moving towards implementation science.
Awesome, thanks for that. So was that, was Renad next or Brian? I'm sorry.
I think it was Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Sorry about that. There's my skill as a facilitator.
My apologies. So, I provided a partial answer, I think, in my answer to your first question, David. But, I think back in the late 80s into 1990, so after having read work from John Eisenberg and Jonathan Lomas, Jeremy Grimshaw and others, I knew I was interested in the field of changing physician behavior when we launched our VA Center of Excellence and convinced VA leadership to rename it Changing Provider Behavior. I knew that I was in the field called changing provider behavior. After Don Berwick and others introduced continuous quality improvement, we began to call ourselves researchers in the field of quality improvement research. It was really, I think, 2002 when John Demakis and others responsible for Query agreed to the change from translation research coordinators to implementation research coordinators. And then, the debate over the title of the journal, which was an interesting experience where we went through different options like the Journal of Quality Improvement Research, and eventually everyone agreed on implementation science. So again, I've known for quite a while that I was in this field, but the label that I used and supported has changed over time.
Great, thanks, Brian. Renat.
I think for me, it was probably after I did my first training study in 2007. And I think that's an entry point for a lot of people. You notice a research to practice gap, and then you wonder if the reason is people just don't know about this thing. And then you do a training study, and then you realize, oh my God, there's so much more than just, training people in an evidence-based practice. So I can't say there was a moment where I woke up and I said, I'm an implementation scientist today. But that was when I realized that there was kind of a world beyond the world that I was getting trained in my graduate program. And then I was super lucky because I participated in TITRE, which was the NIH Training Institute through OBSSR, and then the Implementation Research Institute in 2012 with Ronnie. So that really helped kind of give me the transformative foundational knowledge that I needed. But I do want to say there's no right or wrong way to do implementation science. And there's different phenotypes. Some people just need to be aware of it, and others are going to have it be in their toolkit, but they're not going to wake up and say, I'm an implementation scientist. And then they're going to be people who drink the Kool-Aid and are all in. And, I think all comers are welcome. We are all kind of aligned in our shared mission to transform and improve health and healthcare equitably.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And just even my own reflections on things. So when I was in grad school, it was this vague notion, kind of similar to what Brian's saying, of translating research into way, shape, or form. And it was these concepts of evidence-based medicine and how does one actually manage the introduction of various practices into different settings. But it wasn't necessarily, this is the term under which every study, every thought, every question resides. And we may still be in that place, and that's perfectly fine. And it seems like moving the idea of what does this term belong to what are the key questions and what are the key communities that we can build to try and answer really important questions may go beyond any particular one. So I do want to see, for those who haven't entered your responses, I'm not sure then you can see the results. So just wanted to pick a couple of the additional responses. So thank you all. So several did focus on what year it was, but some people found that it was coming and seeing the convergence around behavioral science and implementation science. In some cases, it was, as we already heard from our panelists, a specific didactic course within a training program that really helped. When somebody realized that implementation was more than just disseminating evidence. When there were presentations that we would often give to healthcare providers about guidelines, and nothing changed as a result of them. So lots of really great responses. And I think the idea is that there's not one path, but ideally there's a community where some of the same things that you're challenged with, or some of the same things that you care about and want to see different, can find some convergence within that large tent. For submitting your thoughts. Also, just to note, keep track of the chat. You'll see that Sarah already put in the TA workshop, and then there's a potential reference to a great paper that Renat was involved in that hopefully we can pick up a little bit later around a pre-mortem, why things might go wrong in the future, depending on where we start. So next question, I do want to just see if each of you can reflect quickly around the different conferences that you've attended, and at least how you've seen over time the sort of outputs, the population grow or transition. So how have things changed as you've seen the conference of the years? And maybe we'll go, let's see, we'll go Renat and Ronnie and then Brian.
I'll keep my comments brief on this one. I've been to all of them, and I think Brian has already said some of the things that I might say with regard to this in terms of there's a lot more people and this work is being done in many more areas. And the range of information presented has changed over the years. But I think the guiding mission, which is really to transform health and healthcare equitably, has not changed. And it's just so lovely to come together with this warm community and to have many more people join us and feel that this is important work. And so it's been a growing tent over the years, which has been really lovely for me to be a part of.
Great.
And, David, what I have loved, I don't know how many years you've done this, but at least in the last several years, you have asked people, you know, is who here is, you know, here for the first time? Like, is this who's, you know, here attending D&I for the first time? And it's so amazing how many new people there are at these conferences. And so when you think like you've reached a lot of people, and then the next year, you know, a good third of the hands that go up are like there for the first time, which is really remarkable. And I just think is a testament to people recognizing how important implementation science is. And I think that part about like, you don't have to be someone who is all in all the time to really benefit from this is really important. That like attending these kinds of conferences and learning like what the key issues are and how to bring some of that into your work. I mean, that's kind of what we do in our training programs too. You know, that doesn't mean that everything that we need to learn is going to be used in every project, but being aware of it and knowing like what it can bring to your project and what it could lead to, and maybe the next research question is really important. So I just love, and I've been to 12, so not all of them, but that, you know, that there are still so many people who are coming for the first time. And I just want to say, sorry, before Brian, that the TA workshop tomorrow on November 18th is when you need to get your abstract in for that. So the link is there. Thank you, Sarah. And we hope that you will send in your abstract.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the reminder. Brian.
So one of the advantages of being an OG, as Renee said, and I don't think this is what it means, but I always hear old guy, is that I've had the opportunity to be on the planning committee since the very first conference, other than the year when we had a set of small conferences. So I, of course, have been to all of the meetings. And, you know, I think we've all covered, you know, the growth and the change over time. But I'll just add one comment, and that is, I think all of us in the field can take a great deal of pride in the fact that as the field has evolved and as the conference and its output have changed, there is a very clear path of you know, seeking new answers and you know, determining that what we're doing isn't quite getting us there, and not continuing to you know, hammer away at the same approaches, but instead launching new efforts, new approaches, new theories, new research ideas and questions and so on. So I think the field has evolved in a very productive manner. And again, I think you know, everyone involved can be proud of that evolution.
Yeah, no, thanks all for those comments. I mean, again, I think it's always exciting, and especially, you know, again, this year with the expectation of folks being able to be face to face, to just see, you know, sort of bask in the warmth of the community. And also, yeah, I mean, Ronnie, as you said, you know, when we ask that question each year, you know, who's a newcomer, and sometimes we say, how many of these conferences have you been to? I think it hopefully is a welcoming opportunity for people who haven't been to the conference before. We've tried to do, and you know, Renad has really helped to lead with other colleagues, orientations to the field so that nobody feels like they're instantly confronted with all sorts of jargon and terminology without some sense making around it. But yeah, I mean, it's always exciting to see how group evolves over time. And Brian, to your point, really how our thinking evolves, not just the people who are in the room. I want to just encourage folks that if you have questions, if you have observations, please do enter more of them in. Thanks to those of you who already have, and we're keeping a running list. But as questions or thoughts come up, please don't hesitate. So I'm curious, actually, and whether it's 15 or 14, and then small meetings that you've been to, or it's 12, or it's fewer than that. Just curious, actually, for each of our panelists, what highlights any thing? Is it just this sort of homogenized thing, or are there certain highlights over the years, speakers or sessions or topics that sort of stand out for you as sort of greatest hits? Anything really that resonates in that way? And maybe we can go Brian, and then Ronnie, and then Renat.
Yeah, so my answer will be short because I spent some time after we did our dry run a number of weeks ago and talked through some of the questions, trying to identify some, and there isn't really anything that stands out other than just the whole tapestry of innovation, creativity, and the diversity of speakers and perspectives, and every year new ideas that I think are directly relevant to the kinds of things that I'm doing, but offer new paths. So I don't know if it's good or bad that I don't have any specific highlights, but certainly an impression that every year is full of highlights.
Cool.
And for me, I do have one, and it was early in the time that I was attending these conferences, and that was 2011, where Gary Bennett stood, I think it was a plenary talk, and talked about working in the health IT app space, about comparing his work that he was doing, a clinical trial, and sort of the strict protocol that they were following in their project, as is often the case when you're doing a clinical trial, comparing that to what was happening in the commercial space, in the real world space of app-based weight management programs. So his was a weight management program, comparing it, and then he had a fantastic slide where he just scrolled down all the changes that Weight Watchers, I think it was, WW, was doing on their app, really addressing all of the barriers, all of the challenges that were coming up with, using potentially this, weight management app, compared to the sort of the things that they were able to do in their project, and sort of really comparing and contrasting the two. And that made me realize, I did not work in weight management research and nothing with health apps and health IT, but I thought that's just such a strong indication of how much more nimble and flexible we need to be in the research space. And that's what implementation science brings. And then fast forward 7 years from that talk, I am a co-investigator implementation scientist with a lot of people on weight management who are learning how to move from clinical efficacy trial-based work into real world, taking a program out of a hospital, moving into a community health center, moving it into a housing development, and they need to be so real world. And so learning those lessons 7 years ago, we're using something that's online and digital, and how it can change so fluidly has been really helpful to me in being able to help guide other people in that work.
Great. Renat.
So I often can't remember yesterday, but I do have a memory, and I actually just want to amplify Ronnie's memory. That talk that Gary gave way back when was incredible. And Gary was just appointed Dean of Arts and Sciences at Duke, which is amazing. Really excited for him. But the memory that I want to share is one that I actually keep coming back to in my lectures and thinking, and it's actually something that David said, and I don't remember what year, and maybe you can help me with that because that is too far away for me to know. But if you remember, David, there was a year where you had a picture of all these circles all underneath the same tent, and it was all these IS adjacent or aligned fields. And your message was that we are all in the same tent. And it was the message was one of inclusion and the power of synergy with bringing together all these different streams of thinking. And I often think about that because I think we're stronger together and we all have the same shared mission. And when we start to parse apart, being more focused on our differences and siloing, that's where we lose the magic. And so just this morning, I gave grand rounds, and someone asked me, what's the difference between implementation science and improvement science? And I brought out your tent and that visual verbally. And I just think it was a really profound moment for me where I understood how everything fit together. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thanks. For noting that. It might have been 2018-ish down there. But doesn't even matter. But I appreciate that. And certainly for me, sort of like, I guess they say, you know, which one is your favorite child? And it's like every session, every speaker, all part of that same family. But I think, you know, there's sort of some moments that stand out. I remember when Sandro Galea asked, when he gave his talk, he asked, what's the most successful sports team in history? And there were all sorts of guesses. And what he put out was a picture of the US women's soccer team. And it was just one of those things, recognizing that often what is, you know, you know, people gravitate toward may not actually be right, may not be accurate, and check our assumptions and think about what are some of the underlying, this was related ultimately to social determinants of health, but what are some of the underlying features of society that we don't even, you know, we're biased, we don't even think about, we don't even come to. So that was one. Gary's slide, which I asked for, you know, permission to borrow at some point, was a great one. Definitely, you know, Amy Edmondson talking about psychological safety, and just, you know, if we can't find a way to find comfort in security and safety and being able to speak, how are we going to make any progress? Jim Kim, when at the second annual meeting, before he went to Dartmouth, before he went to the World Bank, before now he's sort of affiliated with Brown and doing all sorts of other stuff, when he was at Health Partners, talked about how trying to think about the global supply of antiretrovirals for HIV and this target that they had set up, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but the idea being that it was sort of like they had a commitment to a certain level within 5 years. And they didn't get there at 5 years, but they got there in 7 years. And this idea of, isn't that a success though? Maybe it's not according to the original timeline, but the fact that we mobilize so many people to make such a global, something that we can celebrate and try and replicate in other meetings. So, and then, and onward and onward and onward. So just a couple of quick things to add to your memory. So I do at this point want to now put us to the current day. So here we are in 2022, experienced a lot. You know, some things are returning a bit more to normalcy, some things not so much, and certainly we've learned a lot. Curious from each of you to hear what you think are sort of main areas of focus for the field these days. So maybe we can start with Renat and then go to Brian and then Ronnie. So yeah, your idea of main areas of focus for implementation science.
So from where I sit, I've seen the field kind of go through 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And Brian might have a different timeline of the point O's. But I think for me, 1.0 was, why doesn't it work when we build it and people don't come? And then 2.0 is something we've called the disaggregation paradigm, which is, here are a bunch of variables we can throw into a regression model, look at correlations or associations between context and success or failure. And I think we're firmly in 3.0 right now. Just to tie in Russ's point about the premortem paper, I think the things that we're doing right now are kind of setting us up to protect against some of the potential threats that could happen for the future. And I see us focusing on equitable implementation, so an explicit call for the intersection of equity and implementation. Experimental tests of implementation strategies with a mechanistic focus, so we understand how our strategies work and for whom and when. Rapid contextual inquiry and rapid implementation science more broadly, because we don't want to recreate huge gaps and take a long time to get to where we need to go. De-implementation as a complement to implementation. And I'm most excited by some of the work that's going on right now at the intersection of areas. I think that's where a lot of the magic happens, like implementation science and behavioral economics is something I've been thinking a lot about, and others have been, informatics and implementation science. So that's kind of where I see 3.0 being.
So a lot of overlap in my top 10 or top 6 or whatever the number is, but I'll go ahead and list them anyway. So equity, of course, critically important, and a lot of very gratifying attention, interest. Another set of issues that I would put under the label policy and practice relevance, talk that I've been giving for a number of years now with the title, Researchers Who Live in Glass Houses Shouldn't Throw Stones. The idea that our work is founded on the idea that clinical researchers publish their work and walk away and assume it will reach its desired societal impact. I think we're increasingly recognizing that we sometimes are at fault for some of the same sorts of practices. So, increasing interest in stakeholder engagement, not only clients, but also frontline health professionals and leaders, engagement with policy and practice leaders, a focus on sustainment and scale up and spread. It's not enough to show that we can do something in a single study. We need to make sure that when we walk away and withdraw the research support, that the programs are sustained, that they are scalable, and they do spread. And then a set of issues are related to the distinctive features and complexities of the complex health interventions that we study, implementation strategies, and some of the programs that we try to implement. The fact that we do need to focus on mechanisms, allow for and embrace and study and guide the adaptation and tailoring, focus on contextual factors since they're so important and have such a great deal of influence not only on outcomes, but the effectiveness of the interventions and the implementation strategies. In general, focus on recognizing heterogeneity and complexity and what it means for us. So again, as I've indicated, I'm gratified by the recognition and the interest and the attention that we're not continuing to do the same things that we have, even though they haven't worked, and lots of exciting developments and energy.
Great. And Ron?
And I don't have anything to add from a research perspective to the great things that both Renad and Brian said. So what I'll say is that I think what's really important in 2022 is to continue to build capacity for the field. And I don't remember, Brian, when it was, maybe it was 5 years ago that we added that as a track in the conference. Do you remember when we added the building capacity piece? I don't remember exactly. And I've been part of it for 2 conferences at least, presenting work in there. And I just feel like, for me, that is such an exciting piece. I mean, we need, we've done more training programs, both sponsored by NIH and others, like Renad's great Implementation Science Institute, that other things that people can attend. We've started postdoctoral programs in implementation science. We have more and more people who we are bringing in not the traditional ways to implementation science. And I think that that's really important. We need to get away from, I'm not a card carrying implementation scientist approach, meaning that if people, attend these trainings, they are officially an implementation scientist. I really want people to know that becoming part of projects, attending, meetings, going to learn from others who are working in this field. These are all ways that we can build capacity for the field. There are just not enough implementation scientists to go around. And so in 2022, I really want us to continue to focus on how we can build capacity. And I can't wait to see what is in that track this year at the D&I conference.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. And I actually just want to take a pause and remind folks that in the sort of big tent, or the F bridge as many different worlds and interests as possible, I haven't to this point noted our key co-host, NIH's key co-host for the conference, which is Academy Health, if you haven't attended. And just the growth, I think, some of the growth we've been talking about, and even further capacity, thinking about that sort of larger research that Lisa Simpson and all of her wonderful colleagues at Academy Health are so nicely connected to, thinking about the ways in which some of these broader issues that have been with us for a long time around access, around equity, around outcomes of care, around the quality of what we provide, have that larger group of people who have been committed to trying to advance them, and how do we bring us all together. So did just want to give that plug to Academy Health and the amazing work that they've been doing with us to keep the conference going. At a point, there was that point, and Brian alluded to it after the 5th conference, where how well we as government agencies were able to do conferences by ourselves became a little bit less certain. And so it was really this amazing partnership with Academy Health that sort of rescued what might have been a lost art of a large scientific conference that NIH was involved in, and the VA and HRQ and PCORI and RWJ and all these wonderful partners we've had. So I do, again, encouragement to ask any additional questions beyond those that you've already submitted. So thank you for that. So we're now going to go 15 years. Okay, so we're building capacity. We're attending to some of these key issues in 2022, but it's always good think it was the Wayne Gretzky idea, right? Skate to where the puck is going as opposed to where the puck currently is. So with that in mind, for hockey fans and others who don't like hockey, what does implementation science look like in 2037? So we project 15 years from now, and you'll see again, for those of you following along, that this is an opportunity for everybody to participate. So everybody feel free to just speculate. You're all futurists. You're all pointing ahead 15 years from now. And what do you think the field looks like 15 years from now? Would love to see what answers you type in. And while you're typing them in, why don't we go back to our panelists? So maybe we'll start with Ronnie and then Renad and then Brian on this one.
I would love to see just greater integration of all different types of social sciences with implementation science. I could answer this in the way that Renad was. So I have an idea of how Renad would think about her, because we've been on a panel together before, in fact, at an NCI implementation science conference. So I'm not going to take what I think she would say. And so what I would say is, you know, I have been reflecting a lot on my background in social psychology. And I have been delving into some literature that's happening now around like identity threat and stigma and discrimination and prejudice. And those were things that I just, you know, they're still a problem. They were a problem 30 years ago, 50 years ago. And so, but I think when I go back to the literature now and I you know, it's very theoretical, but like Renad mentioned the mechanisms that, you know, Brian and Renad and Kara Lewis and Hannah Frank and others are working on. Like when I think about the mechanism research, I'm like, it's so based in the social psychology world that like I used to inhabit a long time ago. And no one, of course, in social psychology, at least not when I was a student, and I don't think now, because I've talked to some of my colleagues who are professors in the field, they're not thinking about implementation science. And they could learn a lot from what we're doing, and we could learn tons from their theoretical background. And I think when we understand more about why people behave the way they do, then that only makes our implementation science stronger. And when they can think about how they are informing what we do, I think that would just enhance our scientific efforts. So I would just love to see much more integration across different social sciences in that way.
Cool. Renad.
How lucky am I to have a colleague and friend who's thinking about what I might say to give me space to say it. Thank you, Ronnie. So here's my wish list. One is that the public and policymakers know that there's a field of implementation science and that it has something to offer here. You know, I used to ask people to raise their hand in the audience in academic talks and say, have you heard of implementation science? Could you define it for me now if I asked you? And now in academic audiences, when I say, have you heard of implementation science? Almost everyone raises their hands. So we've done a great job with awareness, but I don't feel like we've gotten our traction outside of the academic audience as much as I'd like to see. And I want us to be at the table. I want us to be embedded in health systems and community-based organizations. At the White House, I think we should be advising COVID policy. And I know Ronnie was at an event at the White House just to do that. So, you know, I think it's really important. There's not a lot of us, but we're growing, small but mighty, but I want us to be at the table and bringing our expertise. Second, and this dovetails with what Ronnie said in the previous answer, my wish is that we will have built enough capacity to do this kind of work at scale, and that schools have educational programs and divisions or departments of implementation science. And that finally, and I think this speaks to Ronnie's point about integration, we all continue to be under this larger tent that David described in 2018, and that we partner with emerging fields like informatics and learning health systems to continue to innovate and iterate and tackle learning problems and recognize that this is dynamic and that we're not going to solve it with one implementation strategy, and that it's complicated and it might be incremental, but we'll get there. So I'm really hopeful for 2037, and then maybe it'll be time to retire. I don't know.
Brian.
Yeah, so I think what I'll end up doing is restating points that have been made already, but let me hit 4 points and characteristics of the field. One is the embedded research learning healthcare system, learning health promotion, public health system idea. The fact that a significant proportion of the work that we do, the empirical work, and even the conceptual work, is done in full partnership with stakeholders, not only the health professionals and organizations, institutions, but consumers as well. In that we focus our effort on the effectiveness pragmatic studies, continuing some efficacy-oriented studies, but knowing that when it really matters, as Renat has reminded us frequently, it has to be with an effectiveness pragmatic orientation. My hope is that we have completed our transition, our evolution from a focus on trying to develop the evidence base for implementation strategies and determine which are effective or not effective, emulating our clinical research colleagues who study vaccines and drugs that come in a single formulation and don't have the ability to be adapted. And we realize that just about every intervention strategy, if you ask the question, is it effective? The answer is sometimes, or it depends. And that we move away from that focus on strategies and evidence towards a focus on mechanisms of effect and understanding how these achieve their effects, when, why, where, under what circumstances, but also how to enhance their ability to be effective, to achieve their effects, taking advantage of what I sometimes call the superpower of complex health interventions and implementation strategies, and that is the ability to morph and evolve. Third topic is the issue of team-based approaches and, again, stakeholder involvement and collaboration, including health information technology and AI. So, 1950s medicine and the term changing physician behavior, was based on the idea that physicians are responsible for most of the decisions in the practice. That's certainly no longer the case. We now have the ability to develop implementation strategies and care approaches with a division of labor that includes not only the clinicians and the other health professionals and the staff, but patients and consumers, family caregivers, community health workers, and computers, and others as well. So, the idea is that the field of implementation science will embrace all of those key players and stakeholders and use all of them to best advantage. And then finally, an extension of comments that others have made, and that is that implementation science be included and embedded in all forms of clinical research. Recently, I've been talking to colleagues about the need for implementation science in rare diseases. And what I've seen and read is the focus on rare diseases and clinical research and practice ramps up, not yet the kind of discussion and recognition of the value of and need for implementation issues and implementation research. So the hope is in 2037 that that's automatic rather than still in some clinical domains, a bit of an afterthought or something that we have to knock on the door in order to highlight our relevance and our value. The hope is that it's just assumed and widely recognized. So those are my 4 key themes.
Okay, well, thanks to each of you. Lots for us to take on in the next 15 years, and adding to that, some great responses from the folks who shared through this poll, that hopefully we really apply implementation science among all content areas and not as heavily focused in certain areas like behavioral health, led by colleagues around the world and not just within high-income countries. It becomes part of the fabric of what we do. Brian mentioned clinical. You could also connect that to community and public health settings, that we have more of a awareness of comprehensive implementation strategies, more opportunities to build capacity and train in the next level of implementation science, that we have an implementation focus. I think this is what we just heard from the development of evidence to implementation, not just at the end. And how do we make something implementable as we're designing it? Some of the key things that you've mentioned around information technology and how we can better populate some of our evidence and guideline recommendations within EHRs and personal health records, and identify contraindications, ways in which we might want to de-implement as well. And then no more lovely way border between the science that we're doing and our practice, right? So not silos between implementation science and implementation practice. The final quick question that I to folks, recognizing that we're at the end of our hour, is for, what would you, each of you, tell people who haven't attended the conference about the conference? What would be your pitch if you wanted to make one as to what they might get out of it? So why don't we start with Ronnie, Nad, and Brian will finish us up.
There are so many great things to take advantage of that are not just the science sessions. So, there are workshops, as David said, Renad and colleagues with Byron Powell and Kara Lewis and others have been doing these orientation sessions to the conference. There are tables at lunch to sit and meet with people in the field and have, ask questions. I love the emphasis on more of these methods workshops that are happening both before and during the conference. So there are so many opportunities to meet others in the field and meet your peers and just learn. So please consider it.
Renat.
So to pick up from what Ronnie said, and I think hopefully you heard this throughout the entire conversation, there's a range of people who attend the conference with regard to their experience. Some people are completely new, some people are seasoned, and then there's lots in between. And you don't have to identify as an implementation scientist, although you might after you leave. I love when people are like, I didn't know I was doing implementation science, but I am. I think everyone that's there really shares this mission to improve health and healthcare equitably. We do it in a variety of ways. Ronnie mentioned we do this orientation. It will be pushed out soon. It includes Megan Lane Fall, Byron Powell, and Kara Lewis and I. And then we're going to do a Q&A that morning. I know when I've gone to conferences where the methods or content area are new to me, sometimes I'm a little bit tentative, but that's a way to kind of get some of the lexicon and meet people. So it's a really fun conference, and I hope to see you there.
So for me, three key arguments. One is the personal relationships, the warmth of the community, the welcoming nature of the community, and the fact that you can't get that by sitting in your office and reading and even talking on the phone or participating in virtual conferences. So that's one of the key reasons. Second is, as Renat just said, to benefit from the energy, the commitment, the enthusiasm of the field. Many of us go to meetings in part because it does allow us to, pick up and sort of be re-energized by interacting with our colleagues. And that's certainly the case at the D&I conference. And then finally, the idea that the field is moving so rapidly and there's a publication lag, and what you see in print is oftentimes a sanitized version. There's no way of really learning what the field is all about and getting the new innovative ideas other than attending sessions and having a chance to listen to not only the formal sessions, but talk with colleagues during poster sessions and during breaks. So I think three very strong arguments in favor of attending the meeting.
Cool. And my quick one is I've been to all of them, and there's never been a conference that I've been to that I haven't learned a ton. So I've learned a ton from the three of you. Thank you so much for your participation. I expect to learn a ton in just a month or so, less than a month's time at the conference. Hope to see everybody there. And, if this is where you can pull up a chair by the fire as things are getting cold, or you have your own place, be comfy for the next few weeks, and then join us if you can in DC in December. So thanks so much to our panelists, and I'll turn it over to Sarah to close us out.
Thank you all so much. I want to thank our panelists, David, our host, and all of you for joining. An archive of today's session will be made available shortly on our website. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you in the new year at a future implementation science webinar. You may disconnect at this time. Take care, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.